Thucydides was one of the most influential historians of the ancient world and is often regarded as one of the founders of serious historical writing. He was an Athenian historian, military commander, and political thinker who lived during the 5th century BC. His greatest work, The History of the Peloponnesian War, tells the story of the long and devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta. Although the work ends abruptly in 411 BC, before the war itself was finished, it remains one of the most important historical texts ever written. Thucydides was born around 460 BC in Athens. He identifies himself as an Athenian and says that his father's name was Olorus. He belonged to the Deme of Halimus, and his family appears to have been wealthy and well-connected. His father's name may suggest a connection with Thrace, and Thucydides himself owned gold mines in the region of Skapte-Hyel, near the island of Thasos. This wealth likely gave him the independence and resources needed to devote much of his life to research and writing. Very little is known about his early life with certainty. Later, ancient traditions claimed that, as a boy, he once heard the historian Herodotus speak in Athens and was so moved that he decided to become a historian himself. This story is probably legendary, but it reflects the ancient belief that Thucydides continued and transformed the historical tradition that Herodotus had begun. Thucydides lived through some of the most dramatic events of the classical Greek world. He experienced the Plague of Athens, which struck the city during the early years of the Peloponnesian War and killed thousands of people, including Pericles. Thucydides himself survived the plague, and his description of it is one of the most powerful passages in ancient literature. He carefully observed the symptoms, the fear, the social breakdown, and the way people changed their behavior when law, religion, and custom seemed powerless before disaster. Thucydides was not only a writer, but also a general. In 424 BC, during the Peloponnesian War, he was serving as an Athenian commander in the northern Aegean region. At that time, the Spartan general Brasidas attacked Amphipolis, an important Athenian city in Thrace. Amphipolis was strategically valuable because it controlled access to timber, mines, and northern trade routes. Thucydides was stationed at Thasos and was called to help, but by the time he arrived, Amphipolis had already surrendered to Brasidas. Athens blamed him for the loss, and he was exiled. This exile changed the course of his life. Thucydides later wrote that he spent 20 years away from Athens, which allowed him to observe the war from both sides. Because he was no longer tied directly to Athenian political life, he could travel among different Greek communities and gather information from Athenians, Spartans, and their allies. His exile, though personally damaging, gave him a wider perspective and helped him write a more balanced account of the war. Thucydides believed from the beginning that the Peloponnesian War would be greater and more important than any previous Greek conflict. He began recording events as soon as the war broke out in 431 BC. Unlike many earlier writers, he did not focus on myths, divine signs, or legendary explanations. Instead, he wanted to understand political decisions, military strategy, human ambition, fear, self-interest, and the deeper causes behind events. This is why many modern scholars call him the father of scientific history. His method was unusually strict for the ancient world. He relied on eyewitness testimony, personal investigation, and careful comparison of different accounts. He admitted that it was difficult to discover the exact truth, especially about speeches and events remembered differently by different people. Yet he tried to go beyond rumor and patriotic exaggeration. His goal was not to entertain, but to create what he famously called a possession for all time, a work that future generations could use to understand human behavior in times of crisis. One of the most distinctive features of Thucydides' history is his use of speeches. He includes long speeches by generals, ambassadors, politicians, and public leaders. These speeches are not word-for-word records. Thucydides himself explains that he reconstructed them according to what he believed was appropriate to the situation and the arguments that were likely made. Through these speeches, he explores political ideas, strategic reasoning, moral conflict, and the psychology of power. The most famous of these speeches is Pericles' funeral oration. In this speech, Pericles praises Athens as a model of freedom, courage, public service, and democratic greatness. The speech presents Athens at its highest moral and political confidence, but Thucydides places it close to his description of the plague, where Athens descends into fear, selfishness, and social disorder. This contrast is one of the reasons his writing feels so powerful. He shows both the ideals of a city and the fragility of those ideals under pressure. Thucydides admired Pericles. He believed that Athens functioned best when guided by a strong, intelligent leader who could restrain the emotions of the people. In his view, Pericles had influence over the masses without simply flattering them. After Pericles' death, Thucydides was much more critical of later democratic leaders, especially figures such as Cleon and Hyperbolus. He saw them as demagogues who encouraged reckless decisions and appealed to popular anger. At the same time, Thucydides was not simply a supporter of Sparta or an enemy of Athens. His writing is often severe toward both sides. He shows Spartan caution, slowness, and brutality, just as he shows Athenian ambition, arrogance, and imperial violence. His aim was to expose the logic of power. For this reason, he has often been called one of the earliest thinkers of political realism. Political realism is the view that states often act according to fear, interest, security, and power rather than justice or morality. Thucydides' work is filled with examples of this. The most famous is the Melian Dialogue, where Athenian representatives tell the neutral island of Melos that questions of justice only matter when both sides have equal power. The Athenians argue that the strong do what they can, while the weak suffer what they must. This passage remains one of the most studied texts in international relations. Thucydides was deeply interested in human nature. He believed that war reveals what people and states truly are. In peaceful times, laws, customs, and religion may restrain behavior, but under the pressure of war, fear, ambition, revenge, and survival often take control. His description of the civil conflict on Corcyra is one of the clearest examples of this idea. There, political violence destroyed normal moral language, and words themselves changed meaning. Recklessness became courage, moderation became cowardice, and cruelty was praised as loyalty. Thucydides famously suggested that war is a harsh teacher because it forces human beings into extreme conditions. His historical writing is also notable for what it leaves out. Unlike Herodotus, Thucydides rarely discusses customs, geography, legends, religion, art, or daily life unless they directly affect political or military events. He was not trying to describe an entire civilization. He was trying to analyze a war. His focus was narrow but intense. Decisions, causes, consequences, strategy, speeches, alliances, revolts, fear, and power. Thucydides is often compared with Herodotus. Herodotus, who wrote about the Persian Wars, included stories, traditions, foreign customs, geography, and divine or moral interpretations. Thucydides took a different path. He avoided myth and divine explanations and concentrated on human action. Herodotus saw history partly as a storehouse of memory and moral lessons. Thucydides treated history more as an investigation into political reality. Both shaped Western historiography, but in very different ways. The influence of Thucydides has been enormous. Ancient writers admired him, and later, historians saw him as a model of serious political history. Xenophon continued the story of the Greek world after the point where Thucydides' narrative stopped, though his style and method were very different. In Rome and later Europe, Thucydides became especially important for thinkers interested in war, statecraft, empire, and political power. During the Renaissance and early modern period, his work attracted the attention of political thinkers. Thomas Hobbes translated Thucydides directly from Greek into English in the 17th century and greatly admired him. Hobbes, like Thucydides, was interested in fear, power, civil conflict, and the fragile nature of political order. Later, thinkers compared Thucydides with Machiavelli because both examined politics without relying on comforting moral illusions. In modern times, Thucydides has remained central to the study of history, political theory, and international relations. Military colleges and universities still study him because his analysis of war, alliances, leadership, and strategic miscalculation continues to feel relevant. During the Cold War, scholars often read the conflict between Athens and Sparta as a model for rivalry between great powers. Today, the phrase Thucydides' trap is sometimes used to describe the danger that arises when a rising power threatens an established one. Modern scholars have interpreted Thucydides in many ways. Some see him as a scientific historian who tried to analyze cause and effect with remarkable discipline. Others see him as a tragic writer, showing how pride, fear, and ambition lead human beings toward disaster. Some emphasize his realism, while others focus on his moral seriousness and his awareness of suffering.